The history of alcohol is haunted by a ghost. We're used to seeing it in the sparkle of a holiday glass or in the shadow of a dark alley. We've given it names: vice, weakness, disease. We tell its story as a drama of decline. But what if this isn't a story of decline, but a story of survival? What if this poison was once the only cure for thirst? What if it was the very fuel on which civilization ran? The liquid bread that bound communities together, and the ink with which oaths were signed. How did it come to be that humanity's greatest savior became its most silent and intimate enemy? Imagine a world without clean water, not as a metaphor or a temporary inconvenience, but as a daily, merciless reality. Imagine the stench of stagnant water in the summer heat, mixed with the smell of waste and disease. Streets where the same source serves for drinking, for washing, and for draining filth. You see a mother drawing water from a well, and in her eyes there is not relief, but anxiety, because in that clear, seemingly harmless liquid, an invisible enemy lurks. This was a world where thirst was a trap. Every sip could be the last. This enemy wore no armor and wielded no sword. Its name was dysentery. Its name was cholera. They were phantoms living in rivers and wells, silent assassins who turned the quenching of a simple human need into a deadly game of Russian roulette. What did a person from that era feel, raising a cup of water to their lips? Hope, or a despair mixed with fatalism? What is it like to watch your child burn with fever, knowing that they were possibly killed by the very water you gave them to save them from thirst? It was a paradox, a cruel irony of existence. The very thing that should have given life dealt death. Water, the foundation of existence itself, had become a traitor. But in this world of fear and filth, humanity found a savior. And it came not from prayers or springs, but from the brewer's kettle. The process was brilliant in its simplicity. The boiling of water for the wort, followed by the long, bubbling sacrament of fermentation. This wasn't magic, but the pure chemistry of survival. Fire and yeast did what man could not. They killed the invisible monsters. They purified the water on a microscopic level, turning a potential poison into a safe, nutritious beverage. Beer was not just alcohol. It was liquid bread. It was disinfected water. It was a medicine you could drink every day. This drink became the foundation of civilization, not because it allowed people to forget, but because it allowed them to survive. Every sip of beer was a small victory over chaos, over the invisible threat that lurked in every stream. So the story of alcohol begins not with the pursuit of intoxication, but with a desperate flight from death. It was not a vice born of excess, but a virtue born of necessity. It was the first great triumph of human ingenuity over a hostile nature, a shield forged in the fires of fermentation against our most ancient fear. Picture this. The day is fading. A cold dusk settles on the timber walls, on the packed earth underfoot. The air is thick with the smell of damp wool, hearth smoke, and something else. Something sour, yeasty, alive. It's the smell of supper. For the peasant whose hands are raw from working the fields, whose day began before dawn and ended after sunset, supper is not a plate. It is a mug. A heavy clay or wooden mug filled with a thick, cloudy, opaque drink. Beer. But to call it that is almost an insult. To him, this is liquid bread. He brings the mug to his lips, and this is not an act of intoxication. It's an act of survival. Every gulp is calories, the energy to go out into the fields again tomorrow. It is safety, for the water from the well or river could carry death, while the process of fermentation killed the contagion. What did he feel in that moment? Joy? No, more of a deep, primal satisfaction. Relief. This is the taste of home, the taste of community, the taste of another day lived in a world where any day could be the last. This simple, coarse drink held the entire uncomplaining resilience of the northern peoples. Now, let's transport ourselves hundreds of miles to the south, where the sun bathes hillsides covered in neat rows of grapevines. Here, the air smells different, of sun-baked earth, ripe berries, and the dust of ages. In the cool stone cellar of a castle sits a baron. Before him is not a rough mug, but a goblet, perhaps even of tarnished silver. Swirling inside is a liquid of a completely different kind, dark, ruby red, transparent. Wine. Here in southern Europe, it is as common as beer in the north. It is part of the land, part of the culture, the legacy of the fallen Roman Empire flowing through the veins of this world. But what if this baron is a northern lord, sitting in his cold castle somewhere in Northumbria or Saxony? Then this goblet of wine becomes something else entirely. It's no longer a drink, but a declaration. Every drop is a symbol of power, wealth, and sophistication. He isn't just drinking grape juice, he's drinking a fortune. He's drinking the perilous journey of barrels over mountains and seas, the tariffs paid at every border, the risk of pirate attacks. For his men, drinking their simple ale, this goblet is an invisible wall separating his world from theirs. Wine was a luxury in the north, a marker that screamed, "I am different, I am above." But the world was not just black and white, not just beer and wine. Between these two poles existed a whole spectrum of tastes, reflecting the diversity of the land itself. In the forest clearings, where bees gathered nectar from heather and clover, honey was born. Thick, fragrant, golden. From it was made a drink that seemed an echo of pagan times, a whisper of feasts in the halls of ancient kings. And in the lands where orchards bloomed, from juicy fruits came apple cider and pear perry. Their tart sweetness was the taste of the harvest, a celebration of fertility, a lighter and more joyful alternative to the heavy peasant's ale. This was not just an assortment of medieval drinks. It was a liquid map of society, a map of power and geography. The choice of drink was not a matter of taste. It was a matter of status, of origin, of identity itself. What filled your cup defined your place in this brutal and beautiful world. Imagine the gloom of the early Middle Ages. The air in the low, smoke-blackened dwelling is thick and damp. It smells of smoke, raw earth, and something else, something sweet, herbal, almost mystical. At the center of this world is a woman. We'll call her the alewife, though to her family and village, she was much more. She was the keeper of warmth, calories, and oblivion. In her hands are not just herbs. This is Groot, a secret, generationally passed down blend of yarrow, bog myrtle, wormwood. Every alewife kept her own recipe, her own little magic that transformed barley wort into a thick, nourishing ale. She bends over a huge cauldron, her face illuminated by the flickering fire. This is not just work. It is a ritual, a sacred act. Her ale is life itself. In a world where water often carried disease, this drink was safety. It was liquid bread, giving strength to the peasant in the field and the warrior after battle. But this ale had its own fatal weakness. It was as fragile as the morning mist. Without the preservative we know as hops, its life was measured in days. It had to be drunk quickly, here and now. It was the drink of the community, not a commodity. What did she feel, this nameless woman, peering into the bubbling brew? Pride in her craft? The power that this knowledge gave her? or a quiet anxiety that her creation was so short-lived. Every cauldron was a race against time, a small battle against inevitable decay. Her world was a world of the present moment, captured in a clay mug. And then, in the 13th century, a whisper came from the continent, a rumor of a strange, bitter flower that worked miracles. It was called the hop. At first, it was just a curiosity, another ingredient. But it soon became clear. This was not an ingredient. This was a revolution. The hop possessed a power that no herb in the Groot blend had. It granted the drink immortality. Well, almost. Ale, transformed into beer, could now last for weeks, for months. It could be transported, sold far beyond the village, stockpiled. And in that moment, the alewife's world began to crumble. Her intimate, domestic art suddenly became a business. Production that could be scaled up required capital, organization, large premises. This was the territory of men. Brewers' guilds emerged, closed, powerful, exclusively male clubs that quickly monopolized the new technology. The cauldron by the hearth gave way to enormous vats in city breweries. The magic of Groot, the knowledge passed from mother to daughter, became obsolete folklore. The alewife, once a central figure in the community, was pushed to the margins, her craft reduced to a relic of the past. This was not just a change in the recipe in an ale mug. It was a tectonic shift that redrew the social and economic map of society. Power over the production of one of the era's most essential products passed from female hands to male, from the home to the marketplace. And so, with the arrival of the bitter hop flower, one of the few spheres of female economic influence in the Middle Ages was irrevocably lost, leaving a scar on the body of history that we barely notice today. Imagine the half-light of a feasting hall somewhere in Gaul. The air is thick, saturated with the aroma of roasted meat, expensive incense, and damp earth after a recent rain. At the center, at a table of polished oak, sits the nobility. Their fingers, laden with rings, clutch silver goblets. Inside is not just a liquid. Inside is status. This is imported wine brought from the distant southern provinces of Rome. Its ruby glint in the torchlight is a reflection of power, of wealth, of belonging to the civilized world. Every sip was not for pleasure, but for affirmation. It spoke without words. I am part of the great empire. I can afford what is an impossible dream for others. What did this chieftain or governor feel, raising the goblet to his lips? Did he taste on his tongue the distant sun that warmed the vineyards of Italy? Or was it the taste of superiority, as sharp and intoxicating as power itself? For him, this wine was liquid gold, the blood of the empire, flowing through the veins of the elite and confirming their right to command. Now, picture another scene. A rough-hewn table in a peasant's hut, the dim light of an oil lamp. In a clay mug, a pale, almost transparent liquid sloshes. This is piquette, the drink of the poor, made from pressed grape skins soaked in water. It quenched thirst, but its watery, sour taste was a constant reminder of one's place. It was the taste of hard labor, the taste of submission, the taste of knowing that all the best things, the harvest, the land, life itself, belonged to someone else. The difference between expensive, aged wine and this simple drink was not in its alcohol content. It was a chasm between two worlds, living side by side, but separated by an invisible wall. But in the north, in the misty fjords and dense forests, a different magic ruled. Imagine the echoing mead hall of the Vikings, the crackle of the fire in the central hearth, sending sparks up to the smoke-blackened ceiling, the roar of hundreds of voices, of laughter, of boasts and songs of gods and heroes. Here, in heavy horns and wooden cups, foamed mead, not just a sweet drink, but the golden blood of the northern lands, a symbol of unity and strength. It warmed them in the bitter cold, gave them courage before battle, and was believed to heal wounds, being not just a beverage, but a medicinal elixir. What did a Viking feel, draining his horn? He was not drinking solitude or superiority. He was drinking community. The taste of mead was the taste of brotherhood, the taste of oaths sworn by the fire, the taste of wild freedom and a shared destiny. This drink did not divide people into masters and slaves. It united them into a single fist, ready to strike down an enemy. Mead was the heart of their culture, the liquid soul of a people who valued the community above the individual. This was not just a difference in tastes. Wine and mead became the liquid banners of two civilizations, two worldviews, clashing across the expanse of Europe. In every sip of wine was reflected the hierarchy and order of Rome, and in every sip of mead, the wild, untamable will of the northern tribes. It was a silent battle for the soul of a continent, and the choice of drink at the table was often the choice of a side in the history to come. Imagine the late Middle Ages, the walls of a monastery, cold and damp, absorbing centuries of prayers. Outside the window, a world torn by famine, plague, and superstition. But here, in this quiet cell, lit only by the flickering light of a candle and the glow of coals, alchemy is taking place. The air is thick, smelling of incense, dried herbs, and something new, acrid and strangely alluring. It is the smell of vapor passing through the copper tubes of a primitive alembic still. Here a monk, a man of faith and science, is bent over his creation. His hands, accustomed to transcribing sacred texts, now carefully tend the fire, watching as cloudy, fermented wine or grain mash is transformed into something entirely different. Drop by drop, from the coil of the still, seeps a liquid as clear as a tear. This is not wine. This is not beer. This is the quintessence, the spirit, extracted from coarse matter. They called it Aqua Vitae, the water of life. What did he feel in that moment? Awe at God's providence, which allowed him to extract the eternal from the perishable? Or perhaps a slight shiver of fear before the power contained in this small flask? For he was not creating a drink for a feast, but a medicine, a concentrated warmth for a freezing traveler, a comfort for the suffering, a remedy believed to cure everything from a toothache to melancholy. In a world where death was a constant companion, every drop of Aqua Vitae was a promise, a hope captured in glass. It was a divine elixir, born in silence and prayer, intended for healing. But human nature always finds its own path. The secret kept within monastery walls could not stay there forever. What began as a medicine for body and soul slowly seeped out into the world, changing its very nature. The water of life, created for salvation, discovered within itself another power, the power of oblivion, of celebration, of courage, and of destruction. Early brandies and whiskeys, having left the apothecary's shelves, began their journey through taverns, royal courts, and battlefields. This was not just a technological breakthrough. It was the moment the sacred became secular and medicine became a commodity. The spirit, once let out of the monastery's bottle, would never return, changing the rituals, economies, and destinies of entire nations. Imagine, it's not yet dawn. The cold, damp air seeps through the cracks in the wooden walls. Inside the home, the monastery cell, the castle kitchen, the day begins not with water, but with a thick, bready aroma. It's the smell of small beer, almost non-alcoholic, Listen as it pours with a dull thud into a clay or wooden mug. This is the first sound of a new day. For a child being woken for work in the fields, this is not alcohol. This is liquid bread, calories that will warm him from the inside and give him the strength to get through the morning. For a monk breaking his nightly vigil, this is not a vice, but a necessity, a way to wash down the bitterness of his meager porridge, a part of the humble meal blessed by the order. This is not a choice between good and bad. It's a choice between scant food and slightly less scant food. In a world where clean water is a dangerous luxury and hunger is a constant companion, this morning drink was not temptation, but salvation. And now, the day is in full swing. The sun is high, burning the backs of peasants in the field, heating the air in the blacksmith's forge. Sweat pours into their eyes, muscles burn with strain. And then comes noon. Work stops, but not for idle rest. Lunch is for refueling. And again, on the tables, appears beer, a little thicker than the morning's brew. What did this worker feel as he drained his mug? The joy of intoxication? Unlikely. He felt energy returning to his body. He felt the calories and liquid, safer than water from the nearest stream, giving him the strength to finish the work on which his family's life depended. This is not weakness. This is pragmatism in its purest form. Here, alcohol is not the enemy of productivity, but its primary tool, the fuel for the human machine. Finally, as dusk falls, the work is done. The heavy tools are put away, the doors are barred. The family gathers by the hearth, and the air fills with different aromas, of roasted meat if they're lucky, and of a stronger spiced ale or wine. This is the liquid period at the end of a long, difficult sentence of a day. Here, alcohol changes its function. From fuel, it becomes a reward. It loosens tongues, washes away fatigue, smooths the sharp edges of the day's worries. In these evening sips, grudges dissolved, stories were born, and bonds were strengthened. This was not just supper. This was a daily ritual that separated the time of labor from the time of life. This was not a story of widespread drunkenness as we understand it today. It was an era in which alcohol was the very scaffolding of the day, its liquid architecture. It was a calendar, a clock, and a medicine all at once, shaping the rhythm of life from birth until death. Before tower clocks began to strike the time for all, it was the flow of the drink from the mug to the mouth that was the true pulse of civilization. Imagine, the air, thick as soup, is saturated with the smells of spilt ale, damp wool, acrid smoke from a tallow wick, and a joint of meat sizzling on an open fire. The low, soot-blackened beams seem to press down on you, and the floor, strewn with straw, soaks up not only the mud from boots, but also spilled secrets, oaths, and regrets. This is not just a drinking establishment. This is a tavern, the chaotic, pulsing, living heart of the world. Listen closely. That roar is not just drunken noise. It is a symphony of society in its most raw form. Over in that corner, by the light of a single candle, two men are bent in conversation. One is a merchant in good cloth, his fingers nervously fiddling with a leather purse. The other is a ship's captain, his face weathered by the salt winds of 1,000 voyages. Here, on a wobbly table sticky with mead and ale, a deal is struck to supply wool to Flanders. There are no notaries, no stamped paper. There is only a man's word, sealed with a handshake and a shared mug of ale. What does the merchant feel in this moment? The triumph of a good deal? Or the chilling fear that the ship may not return from a stormy sea, and this handshake is the beginning of his ruin? Now, shift your gaze. By the hearth, where it's brighter and warmer, the Carpenters' Guild is assembled. Their hands, calloused and strong, accustomed to the axe and the adze, now clutch simple clay mugs. But they are not talking of women or drink. They are holding court. A young apprentice is accused of stealing tools. There are no judges in robes, no prosecutors. There is only the guild master, whose authority is absolute, and dozens of eyes fixed on the accused. This is not just a hearing. It is a lesson in loyalty, honor, and consequences. The sentence delivered here, in the alehouse, could be more terrifying than a king's: expulsion from the trade, which is tantamount to civil death. The tavern was the nervous system of the world, where information became the most valuable currency. A traveling pilgrim returning from Rome brought news of the Pope. A soldier who had deserted the army whispered of a defeat not yet known at court. These rumors, these scraps of truth and lies, flew from table to table, from one tavern to another, shaping public opinion faster than any royal herald. Here, amid the din of voices, an election for a reeve or a town councillor could be held. No ballots, just a loud shout or a raised hand in a sea of other hands. A primal, fierce, utterly public form of democracy, where your choice was seen by all, friends and enemies alike. This was not just a noisy hall where people drowned their sorrows in cheap ale. It was the cradle of civil society, a laboratory where social bonds, reputations, and informal power were forged. The laws written in castles were given flesh and blood, or were rejected, right here, in the sticky haze of the alehouses. And a crack that formed between men at a single table could become the prologue to a riot that would burn a whole city. Imagine, the air is thick as syrup. It smells of damp wool, spilt ale, and smoke from a tallow wick. The low ceiling beams, blackened by the soot of 100,000 evenings, seem to absorb the roar of voices, the laughter, and the thud of wooden mugs on the table. This is not just a room. It is the heart, pulsing in the chest of the medieval town. An artery through which flows not only beer, but life itself. News, gossip, deals, and conspiracies. At the center of this universe stands the alewife, the mistress of the tavern. Her hands know the weight of barley sacks, and her gaze can unerringly distinguish an honest merchant from a rogue. To her, this buzzing hive is not chaos, but a finely tuned machine. She knows that a pitcher of ale for the weavers' guild must cost no more than 2 pence, as decreed by the magistrate. And when the church bell strikes 9, announcing closing time, she will not hesitate to show the last lingering guest the door. This is not her whim, it is the law. What did she feel, watching the ritual of the stonemasons in the corner? They passed a common cup in a circle, and each drank from it, speaking an oath of loyalty to the craft and to their brothers. Was it, to her, just another serving of ale sold? Or did she understand that she was witnessing the sealing of an invisible contract that would tomorrow become the wall of a cathedral, a bridge over a river? She was not just a merchant. She was a silent witness, and in a way, a guarantor of these oaths. Her ale was the ink with which these verbal contracts were signed. The tavern keeper of that era was not simply a businessman. He was a figure endowed with immense social weight and even greater responsibility. His establishment was at once a stock exchange, a social club, a courtroom, and a confessional. He knew whose fortunes were rising and who was on the brink of ruin, and the community watched him just as closely as he watched his customers. If he served sour ale, cheated on the price, or allowed a brawl to turn into a knifing, his reputation, and with it his license, would turn to dust. This responsibility was an invisible web, woven from hundreds of gazes, rumors, and expectations, and it held him more tightly than any written law. This was not just an attempt to control drunkenness. This was a fundamental social contract, carved not in stone, but at the bottom of a beer mug. The tavern, with its strict hours, fixed prices, and complex rituals, was a microcosm of the entire society. Its mirror. Here, in the noise and fumes, the idea was born that freedom and responsibility are two sides of the same coin, and that even the simplest glass of ale must be poured according to the rules so that the world outside the tavern's walls does not collapse. Imagine the end of a long day. The air, thick and golden in the rays of the setting sun, smells of dust, cut stalks, and exhaustion. The field, which this morning was a sea of wheat, now stands empty and submissive. It is the day of the harvest, the day the earth has paid its debt, and now it is time for the people to pay their debts to each other. In the center of the settlement, bonfires are already being lit. Long, crudely built tables sag under the weight of bread, roasted meat, and the first fruits of the new season. There is laughter, scraps of song, the roar of 100 voices merging into a single, living rumble. This is not just dinner. This is a ritual. And then the elder of the clan, whose face is a parchment inscribed with decades of droughts and rains, raises the first cup. It is clay, heavy, filled to the brim with thick, sharp beer or young wine. He speaks words of thanks to the spirits of the land, to the ancestors, to his neighbors. Then he takes a sip and passes the cup on, and so it begins its journey, from hand to hand, from old man to youth, from the mother of a family to a young bride. What did that person feel, accepting this common cup? Was it simply quenching a thirst after grueling labor? No. In that moment, he felt something much greater. He felt the invisible walls that for the whole year had separated his yard, his family, his worries from the worries of his neighbor, dissolve. In every sip taken from the shared vessel was an unspoken oath. I worked with you. I celebrate with you. And if trouble comes, I will stand with you. The generosity of the host, whether at a wedding where two clans became one or at a religious festival, was not just a display of wealth. It was a sacred duty, a confirmation of his status and his responsibility. Pouring wine for a guest, he wasn't just sharing a drink. He was infusing the very idea of unity into the veins of the community. Here, alcohol was not a poison, but a catalyst, a liquid thread stitching together the patchwork quilt of society. It loosened tongues, but more importantly, it unbound souls, allowing grudges to evaporate in the bonfire smoke and bonds of friendship to be tempered like steel. This was not mere intoxication. It was a collective ritual that bound society together more tightly than any oath or treaty. Here, in the circulation of the common cup and the heat of the flame, the individual I temporarily died so that the all-powerful we could be born, the only structure capable of withstanding hunger, enemies, and the relentless march of time. Imagine a long hall sinking into a half-darkness where the air is thick and heavy. It smells of hearth smoke, roasted meat, spilt ale, and damp wool. The torchlight snatches bearded faces from the gloom, a glint in an eye, scars telling their silent stories. You can hear the roar of voices, punctuated by bursts of coarse, guttural laughter and the thud of wooden mugs on tables. This is not just dinner. This is a ritual, the audible heartbeat of the tribe. When food has sated the body, a different kind of feast begins, a feast of spirit and strength. The games commence, and these are not children's games. In the yard under the cold stars comes a deep, heavy thud. It's the stone toss. A A young warrior, muscles rolling under his skin, throws a boulder he can barely lift with a guttural roar. This is not just a contest. It is a silent challenge. A demonstration that his arm is as strong as the chieftain's. Every throw is a bid for a place in the hierarchy, a silent question. Do you see my strength? Am I worthy to walk in the front rank? Inside the hall, passions burn differently. The game of king of the table begins. By lot or by right of the most audacious, a ruler of the feast is chosen for one evening. It could be a young boy or a gray, toothless old man, and his word is law. He can order the chieftain to serve him drinks, and the most fearsome warrior to sing a love song in a high-pitched voice. In this moment, all barriers collapse. Power becomes an illusion, and hierarchy, a joke. What does the chieftain feel, obeying the orders of a boy? Annoyance? Or the wise understanding that his own power is transient, granted to him only for a time? And what does the king for an hour feel? The intoxicating taste of might, which will melt away with his hangover in the morning. But the most dangerous and most important game is drink or dare. A mug goes around the circle. You can drain it to the dregs, or you can perform a task that the entire company devises for you. Tell of your greatest fear. Kiss the ugliest woman in the hall. Confess to an old grudge. Here, it is not the body that is bared, but the soul. Every refusal to drink is a small act of trust, a willingness to become vulnerable before those with whom you will go into battle tomorrow. It was in these moments, in this forced brotherhood of awkwardness and revelation, that the strongest bonds were born. Shared memories were created that were more precious than any gold. These drinking games were not just entertainment, not a way to pass a long night. They were a crucial social technology, a way to test the strength of society in a safe environment. Here, at the table rather than on the battlefield, one could challenge authority, destroy and rebuild social ties, and turn strangers into brothers. It was a mechanism that kept society from stagnating, letting off steam and reminding everyone, from the chieftain to the last warrior, that they were all just flesh and blood. Imagine the stale air of a tavern, thick with smoke and human effluence. The dim light of tallow candles snatches faces from the gloom, the faces of peasants, artisans, soldiers, who have come here to wash away the bitterness of a long day with cheap, strong ale. Can you hear it? The laughter, too loud, on the verge of hysteria. The thud of wooden mugs on tables sticky with spilled beer. The roar of dozens of voices, where a friendly pat on the back and a quiet argument over the price of grain can, in an instant, erupt into something else. For many sitting here, alcohol is not a poison, but a medicine against the bone-chilling cold, against the fatigue etched into their muscles, against the monotony of a life where one dawn is indistinguishable from the next. It is a treacherous friend that offers temporary warmth, loosens the tongue, and creates the illusion of brotherhood within walls where all are equal before a full mug. But this friend has a dark side. It is a key that unlocks the most hidden corners of the soul, where old grudges, wounded pride, and a blind, irrational rage lie dormant. What was the spark that lit the powder keg? A careless word? Accidentally spilled ale? A long-standing dispute over a property line, surfacing in a drunken consciousness? In an instant, the hum of friendly drinking is replaced by the crack of a breaking chair and the dull, wet sound of a fist hitting flesh. A tavern brawl was not just an incident. It was an integral, almost ritualistic part of social life. The chronicles of city courts are filled with such cases. They make up a frighteningly large portion of all recorded crimes. What did the man who threw the first punch feel? A fleeting triumph of self-assertion? A heady sense of power in a world where he was powerless? Or did he feel nothing but a primal instinct, only to wake up the next morning with a throbbing head, trying to remember the cause but only remembering the consequence, broken knuckles and someone else's blood? But violence was only one side of the coin. The other was quiet, domestic tragedy. The man who staggered out of the pub and, failing to make it home, froze to death in a gutter. The spark that fell from a dozing drunkard's pipe and burned down an entire city block. These were not crimes, but accidents, yet their root was the same. A fog in the mind that had stolen will and reason. The city, this living organism, suffered from this disease, and it began to react. Those in power understood that punishment after the fact was not enough. Thus, the idea of control was born. The sound of a bell began to ring through the streets, announcing a curfew, a signal for all honest citizens to be at home, and for all drunks to get out of sight. And for those who couldn't or wouldn't, the first prototypes of the drunk tank were created. These were not clinics, but rather quarantine pits, a cold stone cellar, a bed of straw, and a bucket of water. A place not for healing, but for humiliation and sobering up, where the drunken haze was replaced by icy shame. This was more than just a fight against drunkenness. It was the moment when society first acknowledged that the vice of one could become a problem for all. By introducing curfews and creating drunk tanks, the state took its first step away from simply punishing a crime and toward attempting to manage human behavior itself, invading what was previously considered a personal matter. The crack between the right to oblivion in a mug of ale and the demand for public order, carved on those dark nights, would forever change the relationship between the citizen and the state. Imagine a street in a medieval town at dawn. The air is thick, smelling of hearth smoke, damp straw, and yesterday's rain. From the half-open door of a tavern, the sour spirit of spilt ale still lingers, and in the midst of this morning bustle, as townspeople hurry about their business, he appears. A figure familiar to everyone. They call him the wine madman. He isn't just drunk. Drunkenness is a normal part of life. It warms you in the cold and seals deals. But this is different. His gaze wanders, unable to focus, his hands tremble finely, and his clothes, once respectable, are now stained and torn. He mutters something, addressing either the passers-by or the shadows only he can see. To the master of the neighboring guild, whose workshop is famed for the best barrels in the city, this man is a living insult. He is a walking disgrace, a violation of order. A guild is a brotherhood, a discipline, a reputation. And when one of their own falls so low, a shadow is cast on everyone. That's why the guilds tried to fight it. Not out of abstract morality, but out of harsh pragmatism. They imposed fines, expelled from their ranks those who could not control their passion, who placed a moment's oblivion in a mug above their honor and their craft. What did that master feel, looking at this man? Pity, or a cold contempt for a weakness that undermined the foundations of their small world? For the priest, hurrying to morning prayers, the wine madman was not just a disturber of the peace. He was a lost soul. His madness came not from wine, but from sin. Wine had only opened the gates through which chaos rushed into his soul. The church saw this as a manifestation of diabolical temptation, a weakness of the spirit that had betrayed the divine gift of reason, and it fought this with sermons, penance, and the threat of eternal damnation. The priest saw not a sick man, but a sinner whose body had become a prison for his soul, and who could be saved only by prayer and the fear of God. He looked at the trembling hands and saw not a physical ailment, but the antechamber of hell. And somewhere, in the silence of a scriptorium or a university library, far from the street noise, another man bent over a parchment. A physician, a scholar, he was reading and transcribing early medical treatises where the first attempts were being made to understand this phenomenon without anger or condemnation. For him, this wine madman was not a sinner or a disgrace, but a clinical case. These texts already spoke of the consequences, of a liver that becomes as hard as stone, of jaundiced skin, of a clouded mind. For the first time, cause and effect were being linked by an invisible but strong thread. Excessive wine was not just a sin, it was a poison, slowly destroying the body from within. This was a new, almost frighteningly detached perspective. And in this clash of three viewpoints, the pragmatic from the guild, the spiritual from the church, and the scientific from medicine, a new understanding was being born. No one was yet calling for total prohibition. After all, wine was a gift from God, fuel for the body and joy for the spirit. The goal was moderation. But for the first time, society began to realize that this joy had a dark, destructive underbelly. This was not a war on wine, but the first organized battle with its shadow, with addiction. It was the moment when society stopped simply looking at the drunkard and for the first time tried to look inside him, searching for the root of the disease in his body, in his craft, and in his soul. The crack in the carefree attitude towards alcohol that appeared then would only widen over the centuries, turning into one of the most complex and painful dilemmas of our civilization. Imagine dawn over a medieval town. The first, still timid light filters through the murky glass of a tiny window, falling on the rough floorboards. The air is heavy. It smells of sour ale, yesterday's hearth smoke, and an unwashed body. And through this thick, suffocating cocktail of smells, one sound breaks through, overwhelming everything else, a deafening, pulsating throb. But it's not coming from the street. It's coming from inside a skull. This is the morning after the feast, the morning of reckoning. We think we know their world from knightly romances and the chronicles of great battles, but we forget the carnal, animal reality of their existence, and nothing serves as a more brutal reminder of it than a hangover. The person lying on the straw mattress could be anyone: a merchant who celebrated a deal, a soldier who drank away his pay, or even a noble lord after a tournament. Right now, they are all equal before this internal enemy. The throbbing pain in the temples is not just a malaise, it is torture. Every toll of the bell from the nearby church is like a hammer striking an anvil in his head. Every ray of light is like a red-hot knife in his eyes. What did he feel in that moment? Self-pity? Or perhaps a primal fear? Because in a world where life is fragile, any serious illness could be a harbinger of the end. In the absence of modern analgesics, a desperate search for a cure began, a search that led down the darkest and strangest paths of folk medicine. The most enlightened might have reached for a proven remedy. They would strip the bark from a willow tree, throw it into boiling water, and drink the bitter, astringent tea. They didn't know that this bark contained salicylic acid, the natural precursor to aspirin. For them, it was simply tradition, the magic of the tree, passed down from generation to generation. Effective, but slow. But what if the pain was unbearable right now? What if you had to get up, work, fight? Then the alchemy of desperation began. Imagine, with trembling hands, a person takes a live, slippery eel and, squeezing their eyes shut, swallows it raw. What is it like to feel that writhing body slide down your esophagus? What was this? A belief that the eel's life force would drive out the sickness, or simply a form of shock therapy, capable of diverting attention from the headache to the horror in one's stomach? If there was no eel at hand, something else was used. Birds' beaks. They were ground in a mortar, turned into a crunchy powder, which was then mixed with wine or water. What logic stood behind this? No one can say any more. Perhaps it was the echo of ancient rituals, distorted beyond recognition, a simple superstition they clung to like a drowning man to a straw. And when neither the bark, nor the eel, nor the beak helped, there remained one last refuge: prayer. An appeal to a patron saint, the one who, by the inscrutable ways of church tradition, had become responsible for the suffering of drunkards. This was an act of complete surrender, an admission that your body was not under your control, and only a higher power could grant relief. This morning ritual of healing is not just a collection of wild superstitions. It is a map of the medieval mind, where practical wisdom coexisted with primal magic, and science was inseparable from faith. In this desperate struggle with the consequences of one night of drinking, their entire life was reflected, fragile, brutal, and permeated with a desperate hope for a miracle. Imagine the late Middle Ages. The air in any tavern from Antwerp to Florence is thick and warm, saturated with the smell of spilt ale, wood smoke, and human sweat. The sound is a constant hum. Wooden mugs thud dully on tables. Someone laughs hoarsely. A lute is faintly strummed in the distance. A golden river of beer and dark ruby streams of wine flow here from morning till night. This is not a celebration. This is daily life. Beer is liquid bread, calories for work in the fields, a safe alternative to water in which disease lurks. Wine is the blood of the earth, a sign of status and a comfort. For centuries, all of European civilization had floated in this warm, familiar, alcoholic haze. The technologies of brewing and winemaking had reached their peak. The drinks had become cleaner, tastier, more reliable. It seemed that this reality, where consciousness was always slightly softened, would last forever. But what did that Venetian merchant or that Dutch scholar feel when for the first time in a creaking port he was offered not a familiar mug, but a small, steaming cup? What did he experience, inhaling that strange foreign aroma, not of malt and hops, but of roasted beans, of earth, and of distant, almost mythical lands? The first sip was a shock, hot, bitter, and instead of the familiar, relaxing warmth spreading through his body, he felt something else, a sharp, almost whip-like jolt of energy. His thoughts, which usually floated in a viscous languor, suddenly gained a sharp edge. The world around him didn't blur, but on the contrary, it came into focus with a startling clarity. It was a revelation. Was it possible to be energized without losing yourself? Did an energy exist that led not to oblivion, but to clarity? This new experience was a subversive force. Coffee and tea, these exotic guests, brought with them not just a new taste, they brought a new philosophy. Their preparation required boiling water, which itself killed microbes and offered a safe alternative to alcohol. But most importantly, they offered stimulation instead of intoxication. This was a tectonic shift in culture. The tavern, a place of relaxed, loud fellowship, began to give way to the coffee house, a space for quiet conversations, for reading newspapers, for closing deals. A space where a clear mind was valued over a loose tongue. It was a transition from collective inebriation to individual concentration. The old world offered oblivion at the end of a hard day. The New World offered fuel to extend that day, to work longer, think sharper, calculate more precisely. This was not just a change of the drink in the cup. It was a change in the very operating system of civilization, setting the stage for a new era. Europe was slowly but surely sobering up, and in this new, sharp clarity, it saw the outlines of the world to come, a world of machines, stock exchanges, and empires, built on sober calculation and tireless energy. From a sip that saved from thirst and death, to a mug that sealed an oath or shattered a destiny, we have walked a path where alcohol was not a vice, but the primary operating system of civilization. It built worlds, defined status, and dictated the very rhythm of life, being both the fuel and the poison in the blood of bygone eras. But aren't we today also searching for our own waters of life, our elixirs that promise mental clarity and endless productivity? And will we not one day discover that the price for this sober, focused reality, built on caffeine and deadlines, is just as high as the price for a world that lived in an alcoholic haze? What do you think? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoy these deep dives into history, subscribe to the channel and hit the like button so we know this work is important. Until next time.